When you read the creation account, how God created mankind, in Genesis 1 it says he created them in his image, right? In his image. The imago Dei is what that's called in Latin, in theological terms. You'll hear that term a lot, the imago Dei. It's the image of God. What does it mean for us to be made in the image of God? Well, let's look at the way that God made us, right? God made us physical. God made us physical. Look around. You and I are physical beings. We're not wisps of wind. We're not just spirit. There is something concrete and physical about you and I. I can shake your hand and give you a hug. We are physical, right? God created a being that is visible, right? Adam was formed from the dust of the earth, right? And you know what? Scientifically, when you think about that, that makes sense. The world is composed of elemental atoms. And you can look at us and the dirt around us and find some of the same minerals. They're just organized in a little different way. But God took something he had created, the heavens and the earth. He took the earth, the dust from the ground, and he formed it into a man. Man is physical. The woman he took from Adam's side, right? It says a rib, but literally it's a piece of flesh and bone. That's why he says what he says, that it's flesh and bone. He pulls out from his side something, kind of like you would do like the kids do over here in children's worship with a piece of Play-Doh. They pull a piece off. And from that same flesh and bone, he fashioned a woman. I like that. I had a Sunday school teacher when I was growing up in the youth ministry over at Bethel, and she always would be sure to make that distinction for us, right? God formed the man from the ground, but he fashioned a woman, right? He took a little extra detail and care. But they're both physical beings, right? God is spirit. He's invisible. But he makes this creature in his image, and it's a physical, visible thing. But he didn't just make us physical. That's part of the problem with the way the world sees mankind. The way it views humans is it views us as purely physical beings. And if we say, hey, if we're a purely physical being and there's nothing outside of the physical universe, then sure, we're just an advanced animal that can talk and use tools and build houses. But there's something more than just your physical being. You know how I know this? If I chop off one of your fingers, you are no less whoever you are. Am I right? I know people who have lost limbs. They're no less human because they don't have a physical part of their body. So there is something spiritual about us as well. God made us spiritual beings. We are both a physical body and a spiritual soul or spirit. And these two come together in some mysterious, supernatural way, right? But in the Genesis account, God forms them from the dust of the earth and forms the woman from the side of Adam. But note what it says. He breathes into them the breath of life. And that Hebrew term is so full of meaning. When we think breath, we think wind, but that same word, ruach, in Hebrew, is the same word used for spirit. So God breathes into them a spirit to make them living beings. We can't separate out the spirit from the flesh without dying. We are a body-soul unity. It's part of what makes us human. Which is why when all things come to an end and Jesus comes back, we're not just disembodied spirits, but God prepares for us a new body. Because that's part of what it means for us to be human, is to have a body. We're created in the image of God. It has to be visible, not just spiritual. It's both. But God also created them as stewards. God made us stewards of his creation. He gave the man dominion over creation to rule it, right? Which is why we have pets. We rule over creation. It's why we eat hamburgers and pork chops and bacon and chickens, right? They are given to us to rule over for our benefit. They are not equal with us. We have dominion over them. God has appointed us as stewards. What that means is it's his creation. Everything that you see around you is his. It belongs to him. He created it. But the special job he gave to mankind was to steward his creation. Now, a steward is very important. I don't know how many of y'all are Lord of the Rings fans. I loved it growing up. The movies came out. I got big into the books. But one of the key storylines in Lord of the Rings is Gondor, the kingdom of Gondor, does not have a king. It has a steward. The line of the kings trailed out long ago, and the steward is responsible for maintaining the kingdom until a king should come again. That's the steward's job. Does he have dominion? Does he rule over that kingdom? Yes, but he is not the king. We are like the stewards of Gondor. We are maintaining the kingdom. We are responsible for caring well for the creation that we have. But it's not ours. We are responsible to God for how we manage his creation, how we hold dominion over it. God put us in charge. He gave us responsibility. We're responsible to him for his creation and for how we treat it and for what we do with it. God also created us as workers. God gave us a job. You see, work is not a result of sin, right? We think it is. Sin has made it harder and less pleasant. But let's be honest, when you've done a hard day's work and you have something to show for it, is there not some pride in that? Is there not something good about that, in working hard and accomplishing things? I can tell you, like I've had periods between jobs where a couple weeks I didn't have one. It drives me nuts. Like I'm looking for things to do, and you run out of things to do at your house very quickly. One, because you're doing all the things, and that's the only thing you're doing. And two, you run out of the money that you need to accomplish those things, right? But we're supposed to work. When we don't work is when we get into all kind of trouble, right? Adam and Eve were given a job. In Genesis 2:15, it says that they were placed into the garden to cultivate it and keep it. To cultivate it and keep it. It's interesting because that same phrase is used of the priests in the tabernacle. They're to minister in the tabernacle. Adam and Eve were priests to all of creation. We have a job. We are, the New Testament calls the church the same thing it called the people of Israel. The same thing that is implied in this phrasing here for Adam and Eve. We are a nation of priests. We're a group called out by God to bring them to him. And, in reverse, bring him to them. God gave us a job. And listen, there is no small task, right? There is no small task. Work is a good thing. And we should all work as unto the Lord, like Paul says. Work is a good thing. What we should do with our jobs is work at them as if we are working for the Lord, because we are. We should steward this creation as if we are responsible to it, to the Lord, because we are. He's the one who created us. But he also created us moral and free. God made the man with the ability to understand and make moral choices. Now, I'm not saying that those aren't sometimes difficult and they don't require some thought, but God made us moral beings. He gave Adam and Eve the right and the freedom to choose. Look at verse 16 and 17 in chapter 2. It says, "The Lord God commanded the man, saying, 'From any tree of the garden you may eat freely. But from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat from it, you will surely die.' literally their only rule. Don't eat that tree. And the question always arises when you're teaching on creation, well, why did he even give them a choice? Because he made them free creatures. He made them with the ability to choose to follow him. They're not robots. You and I aren't robots, right? We are creatures free to choose. The problem is we choose poorly. We choose to sin. But God created us free and moral beings so that we can know what is good and what is bad and choose to do it or not do it. God made us that way. Animals follow instinct. They don't understand good, bad. You know how you train a dog? You praise them when they do something good, and you correct them when they do something bad. But their instinct is to please you. They don't understand a moral good and a moral bad. But you and I, we're created moral beings. We understand that there are good things because they flow out of his character. And there are bad things that don't reflect his character. And we have the ability to choose to do one or the other. We have the knowledge that God created us with to make those moral decisions. He made us with dominion over creation. He made us in his image. Why? We are able to freely choose to be like him. He also made us relational. We talked about the Trinity last week and how God has always existed in relationship. And the only thing in God's creation that God said was not good before mankind sinned was that the man was alone. Right? He says it's not good for the man to be alone. So God made a helper for him, right? A helper suitable for him. I find it interesting that in the verses before, he creates all the animals and they come to Adam and he names them. And each of them has a mate, but he does not. It's like God brings it to his attention. Hey, there's something not good about this. It's not good for man to be alone. If you want to see what happens when people are alone, like truly alone, not like I feel lonely, but truly alone, isolated. The History Channel has this great Survivor series called Alone. They drop off these participants out in the wilderness, and they have zero human contact, and they have to see how long they can last with just their survival skills. But you know what breaks them before any hunger or wild animal or any fear for it's the loneliness. Like after the first 2 or 3 weeks, the wimps are eliminated, and what's left is the person who can just handle being alone. I've seen guys and they're competing for like $1 million. And they're 3-4 weeks in, they're like, I miss my family, I miss my kids, I miss my wife. I gotta go. And like it's not something that like they weren't expecting. Like they knew that coming in, that they were going to be gone for possibly months on end. But what gets to them is the loneliness. We're not designed to be alone. We're relational creatures. And that's part of God's image in us, right? God is Trinity. We were made for relationship because God has always existed in relationship within those three persons of the Trinity that we talked about last week. God created us to have relations with him, with one another, and get this, with ourselves. Right? There's a distinction even within ourselves. You ever thought about that? One of the ways in which we're relational is to ourself. Like I said, animals follow instinct. They don't understand personhood. But like you and I look in a mirror and realize that physical being that we're seeing a reflection of, like we understand there's some kind of distinction there. You and I understand that there is a duality to us, mind and body, spirit and body, if you will. That distinction exists. You ever talk to yourself? You ever answer yourself? Right? Tell me that's not part of our design as being made in the image of God. You know, we joke that we're crazy. I'd say we're probably getting a little closer to understanding the personhood of God there, right? But we're designed to be in relationship with God, with each other, with ourselves. This is a reflection of the Trinity. Now, this is the one that I added in. It's not in your notes, and so you're going to have to make some quick notes, actually doing a lot of writing. Go ahead and change that slide to the male and female. God made us male and female. 6 years ago when I taught this to my students, that wasn't really on the radar as a thing that needed to be clarified. In today's culture, it's something we have to clarify. God made us male and female. He created humans with two distinct genders, and they're meant to complement each other. God created us with genders, right? And we're born biologically signifying what gender we are. You don't separate the physical from the mental or the spiritual, which is what the trans agenda is trying to push in our society today. They want to make a distinction between the mind and the body. They're a unity. They're a unity. They go together. When people say that the mind says I'm a man, but the body says I'm a woman, or vice versa, that's mental illness. That's not reality. God made us male and female. The mind and the body are designed to reflect that. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. Within the distinctions of our gender is a reflection of the image of God. Now, I'm going to speak in generalities. So if the specifics don't apply to you, it's okay. In general, women are much more caring and loving. And in general, men are much more aloof and strong and a little rough around the edges. Those distinctions are there for a reason. Each of those reflects a part of the character of God. Did you know in some of the prophets, God is actually talked about with feminine characteristics, not biological, but in those ways. He's like a mother hen. He has that caring and nurturing nature of a mother, right? Now, I love my little boy. But the way Jacinda loves my little boy and the way I love my little boy are two different kinds of expressions of love. And both of those expressions are a reflection of the image of God. You see, I'm dad, so I try to toughen him up, right? I don't coddle him, right? I make sure he's all right. If he falls down, I make sure nothing's broke. But, we kind of shake it off and we go on. Mama makes sure that everything's good and he's okay and he don't, guys, we're like, rub a little dirt in it, keep playing, you're good. But Mama wants to make sure everything's good. And you know what? Sometimes that causes conflict in relationships, am I right? Like the way you handle that? Both of those are good. Both of those are good, right? Because both of those are a reflection of the love that God has for us, right? Sometimes what you need is a little bit more care, right? A little bit more love. You need a little bit more like Mama gives. But sometimes what we need is what Daddy gives, right? Buck up, you're okay. Toughen up. It's for your good. Now, wisdom has to prevail in situations like that, right? Who is needed more in that? But both of those expressions are a reflection of God's love for us. within the distinctions of those genders, God is making himself known in specific ways that are distinct from one another. Both equally made in the image of God, but different. Different. And that's good. It's good that that's different. That difference is important. Because let's be honest, ladies, you're a lot prettier than the men folk. Think about it. It's even in the passage here. God formed the man from the dirt, but he fashioned the woman. There's a distinction there. Some ladies that I've taught that like to joke that they're the crowning achievements, right? They're the more refined version. And it's true. In a lot of senses, it's true. But here's where our society goes awry. If you are biologically female, you are female. And if your mind says differently, there's something wrong with the mind. And there should not be any attempts to change the body to reflect what the mind thinks. And that's a thing, y'all. It's a thing that is more and more common. But part of being made in the image of God is that you are male or you are female. And that is a beautiful thing. That distinction is good. God said it was good. And in fact, he said it was not good for there just to be a man. Creation was done and completed, and everything was right in the world when there was a man and a woman. And they are made to complement one another. Physically, spiritually, emotionally, socially. In all the ways that you can possibly imagine, men and women are made to complement one another. You ever heard that saying, opposites attract? It's true, right? I bet you in most relationships here, one of y'all is super outgoing and likes to be the life of the party, or at least likes to be out and about. But one of y'all is a homebody, right? It's okay. You can nod your head, right? One of y'all is real happy by yourself, and the other one's really happy in a crowd. Or, there are all kinds of differences that have nothing to do with gender and everything to do with personality. And what the church has to be careful of is that we don't lump what are personality distinctions into gender distinctions. Because that has led to a lot of difficulties, right? Not every man is rough and tough and tumble, right? Right? Some guys are really at home in an office. That doesn't make them less manly. Just makes you less apt to survive if the world ends, right? I know where I'm going when all the stuff hits the fan. I'm going to my daddy's because he's that rough and tumble man. He's got all the guns and all the things that I need to survive. But just because, and some of you guys are going to be shocked, just because I've never shot and gutted a deer doesn't make me less of a man. Just means that I fall asleep in the tree stand a lot. Right? But we have to ask ourselves, what is the distinction between the man and the woman? They're complementary. The man is supposed to take on leadership. That doesn't mean that the woman cannot lead. What it does mean is that the man is supposed to take charge. It does not mean that the woman should always submit. It means that her voice should be heard, and that if the man is wise, he listens and takes into account her counsel because she is a helper suitable to him. Right? Complementarianism gets a bad rap because some men have taken it upon themselves to say they're in charge and the woman just does what he says. That's not complementary. That's not complementary. While you are supposed to lead, Good leadership always listens, even if they don't agree. Good leadership always listens, even if they don't agree, even if ultimately the decision is contrary to that advice. Treating the woman as a helper, suitable to you, means that she feels that her voice has been heard. It also means that there are lots of things, ladies, that you can lead out in. Man is to lead his home, and what we believe here is that a man should lead the church as a pastor elder. But I love hearing a woman pray. I love hearing a woman teach the scriptures. Do you know why? Because that's not something distinctly masculine. Those ladies are gifted in that. I love listening to Miss Sue teach. I love getting questions from Miss Jeanette because you know what? They challenge me. And their voice is needed. They are a compliment, gentlemen, to our leadership. Those ladies matter. So why do people matter? Both, male and female, created in his image to complement one another. You know what God said about that? Perfect. He created them, and he created them perfect. Man was created sinless and innocent. Sinless and innocent. You know how we know that? Genesis 2:25 says this: the man and his wife were both naked and not ashamed. My son is very innocent because he loves to lose his clothes. We don't do public pools because he don't wear clothes when he swims. And he has no shame. And some of y'all got babies that are the same way. And you know what? Innocent. That's what that means. Innocent. Sin causes nakedness to be shame. Because when God created the man and the woman, they were naked and unashamed. It's only after sin enters the picture that nakedness is now shameful. Why? Because when there's nothing to hide, not hiding means hiding nothing. But as soon as there's something to hide, something to be ashamed of, nakedness is shameful. But when God created them, he created them and he created them perfect, sinless and innocent. So when God created us, he created us to share in his characteristics. And so the question we have to ask when we're looking at people and the image of God is, what characteristics of God do we share in? Now, on your piece of paper it says, what characteristics of God do we share? I felt weird about that. But it's what characteristics of God do we share in? Now we have to talk about there are two different kinds of characteristics for God. There are transcendent characteristics, things that you and I have no common ground with him at all, right? Those are the omnis, his omniscience, his omnipresence, his omnipotence. That means he's all-powerful, all-knowing, and everywhere all at once. You and I don't share in those characteristics at all. Those are distinctly divine characteristics. He is infinite and we are finite. But part of being made in the image of God is that, like a mirror, when you look in a mirror, what do you see? You see yourself. But is that you? No, it's an image of you. It looks like you, and the better the mirror, the better the reflection, the better you look in that mirror. Or sometimes maybe the worst, I don't know. But when we look into a mirror, the better the mirror, the better the reflection of ourselves that we see. God made us like a mirror. We're to reflect his character. Are we God? No, we are like that mirror. It looks like us, but that's not us. It's distinct from us. But that reflection looks like us. we're to be the same way. We're not God. Never will be. There is not a divine thing about you and I. But we are made like that mirror to reflect his character. And the first characteristic we should reflect is his holiness. Right? God is absolutely separate from any kind of evil. And we mirror God when we hate sin and love holiness by repenting of our sin and fighting against sin in the world. It's that resisting sin is how we image God, how we reflect his holiness. And it's important that we do that, right? This is probably the part where we least reflect him sometimes. But it's the part that he most wants us to reflect. He also wants us to reflect his love, right? God alone is perfectly good and loving, and he alone is the source for all goodness and love. Think about that. He is the source of all goodness and love. God is good and God is loving, but he is goodness. He is love. John, in fact, says that in 1 John, that God is love. Not love as God, but love as a characteristic. By definition, it finds its meaning in the character of God. And so we mirror God best when we love him and others, starting with our families and friends and fellow church members, and extending to strangers for hospitality, and even enemies for reconciliation. Because Jesus even said, love your enemies. And he said to his disciples, love one another, because the world will know you are my disciples when you love one another. God also is truth. He's the source of all truth. In fact, when Jesus, one of his I am statements says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And no man comes to the Father except through him. He is the embodiment of truth. If something is true, that means it is an accurate reflection of God and what he has done. So we mirror God and his truth when we believe biblical truth over the lies and speak truthfully as an act of worship. That's why theology is so important. We study God so that we say right things about him, so we sing right songs about him, so that we say right things when we preach about him. It's so important for us to know the God of truth. God is not someone that we get to make up what he is like for us. There is not a truth for you and a truth for me, because truth comes from God. God is its source. That means that truth is absolute. Oh, you're just speaking your truth. No. God is the possessor of truth because he is truth. You and I don't have a truth. Truth is what accurately reflects the God who is and the world he created. That is truth. And everything else is a lie. We also want to reflect his righteousness. And it's important for us to understand, distinct from his holiness, where it's separate from sin, but his righteousness, because God does not conform to a standard of right and wrong, but right and wrong flow out of his character. That's a huge distinction to make, right? Because sometimes God does things and we're like, I don't know that I necessarily agree with that, and God really didn't ask our opinion. Right? We're in some tough passages in our Sunday school classes where Joshua's going in and God tells him, you wipe every living thing out when you take Jericho. No man, woman, or child, or animal left alive. Everything dies. And we go, that offends my modern sensibilities. That does not seem like the God who loves me and sent his son to die for me. But right and wrong flow out of his character. And what we learn in that passage is that God had given them 400 years to repent of their sin and turn back to doing what was right. And when they didn't, he used Israel as the instrument of his judgment. Now that's Israel, not the church, so get it right. We mirror God as we fight oppression and injustice and evil and pursue justice. Now those are fun words, aren't they? Media has taken those words and now they have a connotation that when I taught this 6 years ago, nobody would have had the instinctual reaction you had because you've been watching Fox News. Can I tell you that? Nobody would have had the visceral reaction to those terms that you've had because you've been watching CNN. Okay? Those are good words. Now, like all things, our society, because it is sinful, has twisted those words. But we are supposed to fight oppression and injustice and evil and pursue justice. Now, the world and the Bible have two distinct ideas about what that is. But those words are true words that reflect the character of God. When we do find oppression and injustice and evil, we are supposed to fight it. Now, we have to look closely and define what those are. Because some people would say if you cut a head in line, that's oppression, right? It's not oppression, okay? But there are systems in place, right, that make a distinction that between people that shouldn't be there, right? That's injustice. There's evil. There's true evil in our world. And if you've been following any of the debate at all after the overturn of Roe v. Wade, what you have seen is pure evil. What was whispered in the dark and hidden behind nice terms is now just open and blatant. They want to kill babies, and now they're actually saying it that way. And we mirror God when we fight that. When laws are applied differently to different racial groups, we should rightly fight that. That's injustice. That doesn't reflect the character of God. God is an impartial judge. And so if our justice is to be just, it must also be impartial. We mirror God when we fight injustice, partial judgment, and seek to replace it with impartial, right justice, particularly for those without power, right? Such as the unborn, the sick, the poor, the marginalized, the defenseless, and the abused. Few of us are going to question the first two, right? The unborn, the sick. But if you've ever been in a church where there was a vast distinction in income, you need to make sure that those who are without resources also receive right treatment. Because your money shouldn't define the type of justice you get. Justice should be impartial. Just because you're not part of the in crowd should not change the rightness of the actions and speech that you receive. It should be impartial. Those who cannot defend themselves, those who have suffered abuse, rightly receive our help. Why? Because that's part of being image bearers of God, is making sure that His righteousness is found everywhere. And when it's not, we seek to correct it. God is an impartial judge. And we should seek to make sure that our justice is also impartial. Mercy. God does not give some people what they deserve. Why? Because He is loving and gracious. We mirror His mercy when we forgive those who sin against us and do good to those who do evil in an effort to bring them to repentance. Think about that. Some of the more controversial teachings of Jesus: if someone wants your shirt, give them your cloak. someone demands you carry their stuff a mile, you carry it 2 miles. Pray for those who spitefully use you. Turn the other cheek. We don't like those, do we? Those are hard. Those are hard. And in our society, some people think that makes you weak. It is an extraordinary level of strength to know you can do something about that and not. It takes an extraordinary level of strength to say, you know what? I am going to show mercy to those who have not shown themselves worthy of it. It's an extraordinary kind of strength. Do you know why? Because that's what God does. That is not natural. If you hit me in the face, my visceral reaction is to hit you back. I do it to my car, right? When the hatch on Jacinda's Jeep bumps the top of my head, I smack it. It's a natural reaction. I do. I smack an inanimate object because it hit me. And Jesus tells me to turn the other cheek. Mercy. Mercy. It's the most supernatural thing that God asks of us when He makes us in His image. To do good to those who do evil. One of the best expressions of that I've ever seen was there was a protest on Southeastern's campus when I was there. And honestly, I can't remember what it was about. Probably something to do with homosexuality, because that was the issue of the day. And obviously, we were a conservative Southern Baptist seminary, so we taught what I'm teaching you. God created us male and female. He created us to complement each other. Homosexual marriage is not a thing. So obviously, there were those who disagreed with that, and they showed up on our campus. In today's culture, we would probably have showed up with a counter-protest, yelling and screaming at everybody, but that's not what the students there did. They rolled out coolers with water and drinks. So the people who were there protesting and saying all kinds of ugly things about us, you know what they did? She bottle of water. You want a Coke? We got Cokes. Did they deserve that? No. But you and I don't deserve the salvation that Jesus brings. So when we show mercy to those who don't deserve it, you are more like Jesus than you have ever thought. Beauty. I'm not talking about the makeup aisle, okay? So put that aside. God is beautiful, and His creation reflects His beauty. You ever watched a sunset? I mean, I've seen people wreck trying to take pictures of sunsets while they're driving. They're gorgeous, right? There's nothing better to me than going to the beach early in the morning when the water is just flat calm. And I can completely understand why they call that area the Emerald Coast. I don't know where you get that kind of blue and green. God created that. And it's beautiful. You go to the mountains in the fall. It was one of the best things Jacinda and I ever did when we were in seminary. Right? I had a fall break. She got off on Friday. I said, I already got a backpack. Let's get in the car. We drove in to Cherokee, North Carolina in the dark, so couldn't see anything. But man, when I opened the curtain to our room in the morning, the beauty of the leaves as they were changing colors, reds and oranges and greens and yellows everywhere, and I'm just like, I have never in my life seen anything like that. God is an artist. What He creates is beautiful. And He makes us in His image so that we can create works of beauty, right? Architecture. There can be beautiful architecture. You ever been in one of those old buildings with all that ornate woodwork? Carpentry. You guys that can do wonders with wood, It's a beautiful thing. Doors that open and close, Mr. Jim, that's a beautiful thing, right? We mirror God when we create and enjoy beauty in a holy way, such as by stewarding God's beautiful creation. Or just painting a wall, right? Let's be honest, there are some wall colors that are more beautiful than others. And those who can find those colors on the first try have a special reflection of the image of God in them. Think about it. Someone who can rearrange furniture in a room to just change everything about it. There's something about that comes from God. There's a divine element when you and I take what He has created and make it beautiful, right? Make it useful. Beauty is a part of being made in the image of God. I'm not talking about physical appearance because that's cultural, right? But the things that you and I make with our hands, the way we're creative beings. Some of y'all can do wonders with beads and paint and all kinds of different things. And I'm in awe of your abilities, right? Sewing, that's art. That comes from God. It comes from God. That desire to make beautiful things with our hands comes from God because we're made in His image. Now, all of the stuff that I've talked about sounds really good, doesn't it? And so the question is, what happened? Right? What happened to the image of God in which we're made? Because some people are just ugly. And I'm not talking about physical appearance. I'm talking about their spirit, their character. It's just ugly. What happened? Well, I can tell you what happens. Sin has marred the image of God within us. If we're mirrors to reflect God's glory, when Adam and Eve ate that fruit, they just stuck their fist right through the middle of that. Crack that mirror to kingdom come. You ever looked at yourself in a broken mirror? How accurate is that reflection? It's not. Not at all. It doesn't reflect the image rightly. See, sin has marred the image of God within us, and humans still possess it. It's still there. But it's broken. It's broken. It doesn't accurately reflect God's image. It sends those characteristics that we should be reflecting perfectly into all kinds of different directions. It corrupts it. Genesis 9:6 is, whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed, for in the image of God He made man. This is after the flood. He's given commands to Noah. He says, listen, when someone attacks a human being, they're attacking the image of God. And it's a life for a life. Doesn't matter that human being is sinful and doesn't accurately reflect the image of God in which he was made. He still possesses it, and because he possesses it, capital punishment is the crime for murder. James says it another way. In James 3:9, it says, 8 and 9, it says, no one can tame the tongue. It's a restless evil and full of deadly poison. With it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the likeness of God. It's still there. Broken as it is, it's still there. And because it's still there, it should affect how we live. Because we still have the image of God in us, we belong to God and should live our lives accordingly. I love this passage in Mark chapter 12. It says this, then they sent some of the Pharisees and Herodians to him in order to trap him in a statement. This is Jesus. And they came and said to him, Teacher, we know that you are truthful and defer to no one, for you are not partial to any, but teach the way of God in truth. Is it lawful to pay a poll tax to Caesar or not? Shall we pay or shall we not pay? But he, knowing their hypocrisy, said to them, why are you testing me? Bring me a denarius to look at. And they brought one, and he said to them, whose likeness and inscription is this? And they said to him, Caesar's. And Jesus said to them, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And they were amazed at him. You know what he did? They were trying to trap him, right? That was the controversy of the day was, do we pay that money to Caesar? Because we're God's people. We don't view Caesar as a god, but should we give that? I love what Jesus does here. He says, let me see that coin. Who's that on the front of that coin? I said, well, that's Caesar. Well, then what is made in the image of Caesar, you give to Caesar. And by implication, he says, what is made in the image of God, you give to God. What is made in the image of God? That's us. I love how he turned that around because he says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. It's got his image on it, you give it back to him. Render unto God what is God's. What's made in the image of God? We are. What should we do? Offer up ourselves to him. Follow him. Be the accurate image bearers that he created us to be. But because it's broken, because it's marred, we needed someone to fix it. And Jesus is the ultimate image bearer of God. He's the ultimate. We talked about it last week. He is the exact image. And the ultimate end of our salvation is God conforming us to the image of the Son and restoring the Imago Dei in us. Romans 8:29 says, for those whom he foreknew, he predestined to become conformed to the image of his Son, so that he would be the firstborn among many brethren. We can talk predestination later. I want you to look at that middle part. Those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to become conformed to the image of his Son. However predestination works itself out in our salvation, we'll get to in a few weeks. But the ultimate end of our salvation, right? We'll talk about the beginning next 2 weeks or so. But the ultimate end is that we look like Jesus, that we conform ourselves to that image. 2 Corinthians 3:18. But we all with unveiled face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from glory to glory, just as from the Lord the Spirit. What image are we being transformed into? The image of Jesus. Ephesians 4:23-24 says that you be renewed in the spirit of your mind and put on the new self, which in the likeness of God has been created in righteousness and holiness of the truth. And my personal favorite, Colossians 3:10. Do not lie to one another, since you laid aside the old self with its evil practices and have put on the new self, who is being renewed to a true knowledge according to the image of the one who created him. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. We are image bearers of God who live in a fallen world where sin has marred the image of God in us. And God the Father sent Jesus to be the ultimate image bearer of God who atoned for our sin by his sacrifice, so that the image of God in us might be restored. It matters that you are made in the image of God, and it matters so much that Jesus was sent by God to restore that image, to mend that mirror so that it accurately reflects the character of God.